Hello, my name is Nanda Sundaresan, and in this video, I will be presenting my survey results from my research study on the Hub Starbucks at the University of Washington. Just beginning with an overview of what will be covered in this presentation, I will be starting with some background, including the goals and context of the study. Then I will be presenting my results from my survey and design recommendations based off of those results. Lastly, I will discuss briefly my plans moving forward with this study and a reflection of my experiences with this activity. Okay, let's begin with the goals and context of this study. The overarching purpose of the study is to generate redesign suggestions by answering the main design question. For my research study, the design question will be, how do you make the waiting time of the Hub Starbucks dining line more productive? I will define waiting time as the waiting process from getting in line to getting the food, and define productivity as the speed of the customer's decision making and checkout process. Prior to this survey, I conducted a field study and some interviews. My field study determined common customer behaviors. More specifically, I found that the overall layout of the Hub Starbucks hinders productivity, especially with bakery items and refrigerated items. Additionally, I found that interactions between the customer and barista were important to productivity in the Starbucks, especially when the customer had to choose a place to sit and could not hear the barista. Next, in my interviews, I determined the rationale behind common customer behaviors and emotions. More specifically, I found that customers feel pressure to make purchase decisions, especially when there are long lines with the inconvenient layout of the Starbucks cafe. In addition, customers are frustrated about the availability of items, especially regarding out-of-stock bakery items. I hope my survey will determine quantitative results on common Starbucks action rationales and reactions. The people who were involved in my surveys were 15 students and young adults on the University of Washington campus, approximately between the ages of 18 and 30. I prioritized regular visitors of the Hub Starbucks to help me answer research questions about the context of the actions at the Starbucks, something that a first-time visitor won't have enough experience with. I defined regular visitors as students who have visited the Hub Starbucks more than 6 times this year. I did not survey people outside my age range because I wanted to gauge the average experience of a customer and not outliers. For my field study, I noted that most visitors appear to be between the ages of 18 or 30 or a student at the University of Washington. The image on the right is an image of the Hub Starbucks, which is the cafe I am focusing on for this study. The main guiding research question for the study differs a bit from my overarching design question. I found that survey and interviews determined a large emotional response to inefficiencies in the waiting time. Additionally, customer satisfaction plays a role in productivity. I changed my overarching design question to create my research question, which became, how does the layout of the Hub Starbucks and interactions with baristas at the cafe affect overall customer satisfaction? I also created some guiding research questions. The questions 1 through 3 will provide context as to what aspects of the waiting process currently cause the most friction for the customer. Question 4 builds on that and explores the built environment of the Hub Starbucks. Question 5 will give me a better idea about the emotional response to barista interactions outlined in my interview top-line report. Before we get into the results, it is important to note that my survey used a very small sample size, which cannot accurately represent the entire population. Better results come from widespread and larger scale survey responses. Now let's take a look at the results I got from my survey and my design recommendations. These first set of graphs all have to do with the inconveniences of the line. I want to answer the design question, which part of the entire waiting process causes the most friction for the customer? The first graph is a chart that represents the scores from my survey participants for question 3, which asks them to rate aspects as seen on the x-axis on a scale determining levels of disruption, starting at not at all disruptive to extremely disruptive. There were 5 options in the scale, which I mapped out to numerical values, not at all being 1 and extremely being 5. I then tallied the totals among all responses for each aspect and created this chart. This shows clearly that my survey participants thought that the length of the line was the most disruptive aspect of the Hub Starbucks. The next graph takes the same information but maps out the distribution of the response types over each aspect. For this, I just used the counts of responses, not the ranking that they chose. As shown in the previous graph, length of the line was determined to be the most disruptive aspect, and we can see that in the distribution that many people thought that it was either very or extremely disruptive. This graph can also help me rank which other aspects are disruptive by looking at the previous graph for the overall ranking and this graph for option distribution. For example, the previous slide showed both positioning of foods and speed of food preparation have the same score. But looking at this graph, we can see that the positioning of foods has a greater number of higher disruption responses than the speed of the food preparation. The last graph is a chart of responses to my question which asked which physical parts of the hub Starbucks are most inconvenient. I just used the counts of responses and graphed it. For my responses, the most inconvenient were the spots which were in the waiting line, either before or around the snack section. That brings me to my first result, which I titled, Long Lines, Unhappy Customers. This builds off of my results from my field study and my interviews. My field study showed that lines get long during rush times, which are after class ends and during early mornings or late afternoons. My interviews show that long lines make customers feel rushed and increase waiting times. My interview participants all explained that the long lines pressure them to make decisions quicker in consideration of other people's time. They don't want to hold up the line. My survey now has shown widespread agreement that the length of the line is the most disruptive aspect of the waiting time at the hub Starbucks. Additionally, it has shown that the most inconvenient spots include before the snack section and around the snack section, both of which are located in the line to order food. My next analysis helps me answer the question, what are some challenges people face when ordering food? This graph gives me a distribution of the number of responses that chose which food item they regularly purchase at the hub Starbucks. As shown in this chart, most people choose bakery items and order coffee and other made-to-order drinks. This brings me to my second result, which I titled Faraway Food. This builds off of my results from my field study and my interviews. My field study showed that customers frequently go out of line to check out foods in the refrigerated sections because they can't see it from the line. Additionally, my interviews show that customers find it difficult to make purchase decisions because the placement of the foods pressures them to make quick choices. Now, my survey shows that most of the food that people buy are bakery items, which are located at the end of the order line. This tells me that since the placement of the foods around the hub Starbucks directly affects productivity and customer satisfaction, the bakery items are the most important food to focus on for my redesign. The first result told me that the length of the line was the most disruptive aspect of the hub Starbucks, and my second result indicated that bakery items were the most purchased food next to make-to-order coffee. Using these two results, I propose a physical redesign of the hub Starbucks. We see in this slide here two redesigns that I propose. The first layout reorganization focuses on the lines and how we might use the layout to make the lines less intimidating to the customer. I propose using flexible posts to guide the line in a looped orientation to have the line appear to only take the length of the bar. This redesign is more related to my first result. Focusing more on my second result, I experimented with the layout of the available food items. Since I determined that most people find it hard to choose what foods they want until they get to right before the cash register, and also determined that bakery items were the most purchased food, I propose moving the bakery display closer to the middle or front of the line. This will allow customers to look at the bakery items a little in advance of the cashier station. My next analysis also answers my research question, which asked, what are some challenges people face when ordering food? This graph shows the distribution of satisfaction levels people who did versus did not experience a chosen food item being out of stock. As shown here, there's a correlation between people who have experienced a food item being out of stock and their satisfaction levels. More people who answered yes to their chosen item being out of stock rated their satisfaction level as neutral compared to people who couldn't remember or didn't experience this at all. In the second two bars, we see a higher distribution of participants that indicated that they were satisfied or even very satisfied in the service. This next slide shows a visual representation of the explanation responses in my 11th question, which asked those who experienced an item being out of stock what they felt and did in that situation. I mapped the words that describe feelings and actions people experience when I used a word map so that more frequent words appeared larger. I got this result, which showed me that the most common action was that customers changed their order or left. It also showed me that when people experienced this, they were sad and annoyed that this happened. The two word maps both use the same words, but on the right we see that there are no repeated words, which makes this map clearer and easier to understand. That brings me to my final result, which I titled Out of Stock, Out of Luck. My field study showed that customers were struggling to decide on a new item to purchase after they were told the item that they wanted was out of stock. My interviews confirmed this and added that it's especially frustrating for customers because there is no sign that indicates an item is out of stock. My service now shows that there is a correlation between a reduction in customer satisfaction and experience with the chosen item being out of stock. Most respondents experienced this situation and most said it was annoying. They either left or changed their order after this. My recommendation is an interface or screen that automatically updates information when an item goes out of stock. In this slide, I've shown two sketches of how this interface might look. On the left, I experimented with an idea of an interactive interface, which asked the user to say out loud what item they might want to purchase. A screen similar to the one on the right might pop up, indicating whether or not their item is in stock. On the left is a screen that might be presented just at the beginning of the line. The top portion of the screen can have an updated list of items out of stock so the customer can quickly glance at it and see if their item is not available. Both these solutions reflect the current availability of an item a user wants. Moving forward, I would be interested in looking into how different configuration of the hub Starbucks increases productivity the most. I would also like to research what new features customers would be interested in. Both these research topics can help narrow down the scope of my redesign suggestions and provide more tailored designs. Overall, I think that this survey experience went as planned. I got insights from the recommended number of participants and made thoughtful redesign suggestions. One thing that I would change is that I would expand my demographic to accommodate for other types of frequent visitors. This might give me a wider scope of opinions, which can help make my redesigns more robust. Some limitations of the study include a very small sample size, and with that, some bias. I was only able to distribute this survey to a small number of my peers, which might have affected the responses. I struggle with figuring out how to ask questions that do not bias the participant, but also answer my research questions. One thing that surprised me was how difficult actually synthesizing the results into graphs was. I have made graphs before, but creating graphs from non-aggregated and filtered data is difficult. The most fun part of this was graphing the results. Despite the difficulty, it was really fun seeing conclusions jump out after generating the graphs. And that is the end of my survey analysis presentation. Thank you for your time.